Hey everybody, Shawn Tubbs here. Welcome to my studio. I've got an amp to show you today. This guy came all the way from Spain. The company is called Bigtone Custom Amplification. The model is the Studio Plex MKII. It's a 50 watt kind of British based 2-channel amplifier. They kind of set it up for the guy that either needs, just tons of sounds, like say in a session where you just need to dial all kinds of different stuff, but it's also set up really nicely for the guy that's playing live that just needs kind of 2 great sounds. So I'll just kind of do a quick rundown of what's going on the front panel. So you've got a gain 1, which is your channel 1 gain. You have a gain 2, which is your channel 2 gain. And then over here on the right side of the amp, you have a volume 1, which is your output of channel 1, and you have a volume 2, which is your output of channel 2, respectively. Now, the EQ section on the amp is pretty straight ahead, and it is a shared EQ between the 2 channels. You have bass, middle, treb, and presence. Now, these switches that you see underneath the 2 gain potentiometers are 3-way switches. So when they're in the center, either switch is basically neutral. To the left is what's called bold, and when you move it to the left, you're going to get a little bit more low and mid presence, but you will get a little bit more gain too, depending on how you have the amp dialed. And that applies to both channels. It's the same exact kind of pre-EQ circuit. And then over here on the right, this is a 2-way switch, and it's basically a gain switch. So it's going to go from kind of a lower gain setting, which would be cleaner, or if you need more gain, you can hit that switch and get quite a bit more gain. Now that switch does apply to both channels. On the back of the amp, you have what's called PA settings, and what that is power amp settings. So you have a feedback switch, and basically the way that works is when it's in what would be considered the negative position, the amp sounds more open, it's a little bit quicker response, and it is a little brighter. If you move it to the plus side, the amp is a little bit more compressed, it's a little bit more harmonically controlled. Just depends on what you want. I found that I really liked it on the plus side. I just liked the way it worked with the guitars I was using and the cabinet I was using. You've also got what's called a deep potentiometer or deep setting back there, and you can use that. It's definitely more prevalent if you use it with the plus setting in the feedback. But say you were running, you're trying to get some thump out of a cabinet that you're using, you keep turning up your bass, and all of a sudden your distortion sound gets kind of flabby, or your overdriven sound gets flabby. You could turn the bass down quite a bit, tighten up the preamp, and then bring the bass back in at the back side of the amp with that deep setting to kind of fix that. And also, if you just really like a much more modern low end, that's what that's there for. It has an effects loop in it that works great. It's set up for +4 and -10, so if you've got rack effects, it's going to work fine. If you've got stomp boxes, it's going to work fine. You just have to dial it accordingly. It does come with a foot switch that'll get you between 2 channels, and it has a boost option that we'll get into when I do the actual demo. And then you can also, what I didn't mention in that effects loop is you can take it completely out of the circuit. So if you're not using it, you can certainly bypass it so it's not in the circuit anymore. If you don't want to use a foot switch, though, I would think you would, but if you don't, you can switch all this stuff on and off via on the back side of the amplifier. And also it has 2 parallel speaker outs, and those guys can be run at 16, 8, and 4 ohm. So yeah, let's dig into this thing and let you guys have a listen. Okay everybody, let's get started with this Bigtone Studio Plex MKII. I'm going to use my Sir Classic Stratocaster just because it'll cover a lot of bases for me. We've got quite a bit to go through on this. It's got 2 single coils and a humbucker. They're the Mike Landau Standards and the Sir SSV, I believe. Let's just get started right away on it. I'm going to start on the clean side. One thing I will say, or on channel 1, which I'm going to dial clean, I've got it on the power amp settings, I've got it in the plus mode. So the amp right now is a little bit more compressed, a little bit more controlled harmonically. And I've got that deep setting back there at about noon. Of course, that can be used to extremes. You can use it to just add a lot more low-end thump if you don't want especially maybe your crunch channels getting a little flabby because you're wanting kind of more of a modern low end. You can actually roll the bass off at the preamp side and put more bass in on the power amp side, and it'll sound tighter and bigger. But I just found that this amp worked best for what I was wanting to do with it in the cabinet that I'm using to have it in that mode. Now, if you run it in the minus mode back there, then it's going to be quite a bit more open. It'll be brighter, and yeah, a little bit less compressed, a little bit less controlled. But for demo purposes, I'm going to leave it set with in the plus setting and the feedback at about noon. So let's look at channel 1. Right now I've got it in what I would consider a neutral position, and it's very clean. Okay, so the way it works is this is our channel 1 gain, and there's a switch right below that gain, and it's a 3-position switch. The middle, which is what it's in right now, is considered a neutral setting. When you move it over to the bold side, you're going to get a little bit more gain. It's definitely going to be a boost in volume, but what it's doing is it's kind of bringing up the mids and low mids. When you go to the bright side, on the right side of the switch, it's going to do exactly that. It's going to give you a lot more top-end presence. So we've heard it in the neutral position. I'm going to go ahead and just throw it to the bright position. So just a little bit more gain, but quite a bit more presence. And I really ended up liking that sound for the performance song, especially the top, that kind of pretty clean solo that I did. Now if we go back the other way, so here's back to neutral. We go the other way, go to the bold setting, and that's going to give you a little bit more gain and more mids. And especially if you're going to use back humbucker stuff and you want it to be a little bit more kind of bitey. Kind of getting into that almost the low input of like a Marshall, like an old Marshall JTM or something along those lines. And that's one of the things I really dug about it is in that kind of bright setting, even though this is a Brit-based amp, I mean it's an EL34 amp, it's definitely in the Plexi realm, it sounded pretty darn Fendery. But if I wanted to go the other way and have it sound a little bit more British, I just threw the bold switch and I was there. So that's a really just quick rundown of what that switch does. Now I'm going to do the same thing on channel 2. So I'm going to hit the foot switch, we'll switch to channel 2. Same thing, neutral, and here's the first sound. I'll go back humbucker. So now I'll do the same thing. Let's go to the bold side first. So you can hear right away we did get a volume jump, and you know, as you start kind of getting the amp dialed the way you want it, then you can start kind of setting your master volume levels for channel 1 and 2 respectively to match. But yeah, it's quite a big jump in volume. And I find that it does add a little bit of top end as well as mids. So So there's that. Let's try the other direction. We'll go to neutral for a second. Now we'll go to the bright switch on channel 2. Super bitey, works good for definitely like neck position, kind of blues stuff, really good. Might be a little bright for humbuckers, but within a track, that could actually sit perfectly. So it just depends on what your preferences are. Now what I want to do really quick is I'm going to go ahead and kind of set this up for how I would use it, so I can show you in kind of a live situation how this amp would be used as a 2-channel amp that's really capable of 4 different gain stages if it's set up proper via the boost switch that's available with this amp. So let's check it out. Let's go back to channel 1. So what I like is I like it in the bright setting, but still pretty darn clean. Now if I want just a little more gain, then I'll go ahead and hit the boost switch. And I get a little bit more gain and a jump in volume. So that's essentially your 2 gains. Now if you wanted that to, be more, you could do the same thing in the bowl setting. And that's quite a bit more prevalent as far as the gain difference that you hear. But like I said, just to kind of show you the way I'm going to run it, we'll leave it much cleaner. And then I've got my boost setting. And then I can go to channel 2 and have my first gain stage. And that's with it set with the bold switch. And then if I need more gain, I can hit the boost again. Now I've got more gain, a little bit bigger. So it's really pretty versatile as a live amp. Like I said, you essentially have 4 different gain stages. And if you set it up proper with these switches, even though you're on a shared EQ, you can really pretty much get what you want. Now, one step further, the thing you could do is in channel 1, we've got 1 gain stage. Turn on the boost. Second gain stage, but you can also, because this amp likes stomp boxes, you could do an overdrive pedal. For instance, I've got a rocket pedal, it's kind of low gain, it's the majestic pedal. I could turn that on. So there's 3 sounds, 3 gain stages, and then we could go to channel 2 and do the same thing. First gain, boost switch on, and then we could add an overdrive to that. So I don't feel like you really would have to have an overdrive pedal with this amp being a 2-channel, but it certainly takes overdrive pedals really, really well. Now the way I used it as more as a session player when I did the performance song, I basically switched gears completely and didn't worry about it so much as a channel switching amp. I just dialed it for what would work within the song. Like for instance, at the top of the tune, there was kind of a, this tone which I like, but I needed just a little more, so I ended up using the boost switch. And just turning the gain up a little bit more. So it's just barely breaking up, and then the trick I did was I just turned on like a short verb straight to the front end of the amp, which sounded great. What did I do? Oh. So I mean, it just worked great. And then for the rest of the gain settings, I ended up using the final switch that I'll show you, which it basically adds quite a bit more gain to both channels. And I found that I liked it for my more kind of modern solo sound that I did. I think the second solo with the PRS was a little bit more modern to demonstrate that. So I ended up using the gain switch with the second channel. Now you can use the gain switch obviously with the first channel. And then we can add boost to that. And you may find that that's actually how you want to run it, is just with more gain, and you could dial that accordingly. But what I did was channel 2 with the gain switch. This is without it. And then this is with it. Now I had it dialed a little bit kind of darker. It was something like that. And once again, I was in more kind of session player mode where you dial up that specific sound for that specific parameter, and it worked really, really well. And I think I did turn on the boost. Yeah, I sure did. I had the boost on as well as the high gain setting, just to kind of get it to that kind of modern gain, you know. And that's the thing to keep in mind, you know, if you're going to run it that way, then it's okay to start turning trubs up and down, and because you're not worried about how you're going to completely screw up what you had dialed as a channel switching amp. You can just dial it literally as one sound at a time. But yeah, dialed like this amp, really, it has a great, just kind of natural amp compression. Like I said, if you want it to be more open and a little bit quicker in the way it responds, then you can definitely set it up that way. But yeah, it kind of covers everything. I found that it did almost Fender cleans really well, all the way into kind of JTM 45 land, maybe even JCM 800 land, all the way to kind of more the modern kind of plexi tones all in one amp. So yeah, hopefully I've kind of given you enough of a rundown. There's just a ton of sounds in this amp, and it's just a matter of getting it in your hands and dialing it however you need it to work. So yeah, if you've got any questions about the amp, definitely reach out to Bigtone and see what they've got to say. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this amp demo, and I've got quite a few more product demos coming up soon. So thanks so much for watching.